Hi, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. I'm very excited to be here with Reggie. We actually had a great conversation the other day, and Reggie is a head of strategy for global sports marketing at Oakley. And Reggie, why don't we start off with sharing a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, how it influenced your career, and you know what it is.
All right, I'll give the Reader's Digest version. I've worked across brand and integrated marketing for most of my career. I started my career as a creator in New York, which is kind of how I got more involved in culture, in the culture space, which kind of came a little bit out of streetwear and sneaker culture. I worked for Adidas and Converse for many years, and then also worked with Nike and several other brands from the agency side. Now I work for Oakley. I consider myself a cultural marketer. Although at Oakley, I'm a sports marketer. There's a lot of intersectionality there. So we'll get into that when we get into the questions, but I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah. So during our conversation, I found something very interesting, and since I'm in the Hispanic space, I've always felt that cultural marketing or multicultural marketing has always been Hispanic, Asian, or African American. But there's a lot of different communities. It's very diverse now. The influencer marketing space, which we'll talk about as well, has taken it to a whole nother level. And before we move on, I wanted to ask Reggie, what is cultural marketing?
Yeah, so I think when people hear the word culture, they immediately kind of think about people or HR, because that's typically how in a corporate setting, that's how that word sort of, that's what that connotation is. But cultural marketing is really kind of an extension and an evolution of sports and entertainment marketing. It's really leveraging the world of culture to energize brands. So kind of the best example of that would be kind of what you see at Nike, what you see at Adidas with Kanye West or Pharrell Williams or Virgil Abloh, where you have a brand tap a cultural figure who is usually somebody within the design or creative space. And they usually energize product propositions, and that drives energy and relevance for a brand. So it's kind of been a newer thing that's come about sort of the last 10, maybe 15 years, sort of started in Tokyo in Japan, within sort of influencer and youth culture. And it's becoming, I guess now it's becoming almost like a best practice for a lot of brands, especially brands that are interested in tapping into youth culture. So you see a lot of non-endemic brands. Sort of endemic brands would be brands that typically sell to youth culture, like sneakers or fashion brands, maybe even a consumer electronics brands. Now you start seeing car brands, you start seeing consumer packaged goods brands, beverage brands, all working with that same model. And really what they're trying to tap into is drop culture and hype culture. The way that consumers now shop, they shop based on a drop, or at least young people. That's the way they shop. They don't want something that's mainstream. They want something limited edition, something special. So a lot of non-endemic brands are starting to kind of utilize these tools and these mechanisms to connect to culture and to connect to communities through influencers or cultural figures within that space. So that's really what it is. Some of those figures are athletes. There's usually kind of an intersectionality between, world-class athletes, people like a Kylian Mbappe or Patrick Mahomes, which we work with at Oakley. And then we also have folks like a Nigel Sylvester or an Atiba Jefferson that kind of are athletes, but sit more on a cultural tangent. They're a little bit more influencer. They're not necessarily on a podium collecting a trophy or a medal, right? The way an Olympian would be. So it's just very interesting kind of how it's sort of evolving, and how brands that are, and we can get more into that with the DEI and the representation question, but I'll go into that later.
So I have seen some of your amazing work, and you've worked with global brands like Nike, Adidas, Converse, and now Oakley. In your experience, how does cultural marketing factor into most companies' marketing mix?
Well, I think it's something that, typically most brands haven't really thought about. I think a lot of big brands are starting to figure that out. A lot of bigger brands like an Apple or a Coca-Cola, they're really thinking about marketing sort of from an above the line perspective, which is, very mainstream. It's out of home. It's that type of advertising. Whereas cultural marketing is really bubbling things on the surface. So it's things happening in culture. It's things happening at a very geocentric, localized level. So you might say, oh, we want to energize, I'm making it up, Houston or Atlanta or some of these sort of second tier key cities, right? So you've got your 6 key cities in the world, which are New York, LA, Tokyo, Shanghai, London, and Paris. And then you have sort of your secondary key cities, which are Houston, Miami, Chicago, things like that. And you might have a regional play that a company wants to play off of, to get ready for the Super Bowl or something like that, where maybe that's when they launch the above the line campaign. So it's figuring out how can we tell stories on a cultural level first, where there's no performance media that goes into it. This is all organic. This is all happening within an influencer space, within a community, and things are kind of going viral within that community. So, it's things happening at that level where that level sort of influences the influencer, and then things, get blown open. A lot of times cultural marketing strategies also influence more mainstream marketing strategies, because, some of the things you're doing at a very localized level might be a pilot for something larger if you want to scale an initiative. So that's usually typically how it works.
Great. So how does product factor into the conversation when you're working on cultural or sports marketing initiatives?
Yeah, so a lot of brands make product with influencers. We make a lot of product with our athletes. We call it signature product. We actually just had Patrick Mahomes drop his signature Sutro lens, the kickoff of the NFL last week. So, Nike obviously has been doing it forever. All the sports brands have been doing it for a really long time. When you think about signature shoes, signature products for athletes, that's kind of been the mainstay of sports marketing. And what typically happens is they're royalty bearing product. The athlete typically markets that product and gets a percentage of it. There's industry standards for all that. And that also sort of integrates that athlete into the community and the conversation, and it drives energy for the brand. So typically those product propositions sit at the top of a pyramid. So when you think about product, like each big company has a product proposition at a different price point, right? So Nike might have a shoe for Designer Shoe Warehouse at $50, but then at the top of the pyramid, they're going to have a collab with Sakai, and the shoe's going to be $250, and it's only going to be in very limited edition doors, and it's going to be really hard to get because there's only 5,000 of them globally. So that's typically how that works. And then that top of the pyramid product proposition halos the entire brand. So it energizes all the inline product at the bottom, and it also energizes brand awareness, top of mind, all these other KPIs that you're thinking about when you're doing this. So that's typically how it works.
It looks great. I actually got a chance to see the spot for Patrick Mahomes, and it was great that Patrick Mahomes actually had the opportunity to do to be creative and actually, do what he does, but in a different way, because he was holding his daughter and he's talking to his daughter through a letter or something like that. And we all know Patrick Mahomes as an NFL football player, but now you got to see him as a father. And I think Oakley did an amazing job with that. So I wanted to, share that with you.
I will tell the comms team, they'll be very happy about that.
And I know that you were at the forefront of influencer marketing through sports initiatives, but today influencer marketing has become a complex and niche-driven market. So in your experience, how has influencer marketing evolved from before social media?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, influencer culture was always there. It was always kind of bubbling up within communities. Typically, you had, 25 years ago, you would have people go out and do a street casting. I remember all the time whenever we were casting for campaigns, you'd go out on the street, you go to clubs, you go to, interesting places to find cool people. And now, obviously, you can find all those people on your phone in an IG in an IG post. But I think it's just the evolution and the digital transformation of influencer culture. Typically those folks were called trailblazers then. They weren't really called influencers. I think most influencers hate that word anyway. They prefer creator or something to that nature. But now it's become so niche. Obviously, there's an influencer within anything you can imagine. There's cleaning influencers, there's gamers, there's dog walking influencers, there's fashion influencers. It's very micro and macro. So I think what the challenge is for a brand is figuring out how do we want to create our strategy to sort of leverage from both a micro and a macro level, because we know from micro influencers drive conversion, macro influencers drive awareness, right? So you can't do just one or the other. So it's just interesting. I think it's just keeping up with the digital trends, the digital transformation. A lot of brands too, we have within entertainment marketing, we have our own collective. So we build a group of people for the brand that we manage those relationships. They're typically curated from different communities that we're looking to target based on whatever the initiatives is. And they might be, based on a multicultural strategy. It might be based on a certain sport that we want to integrate into. It might be based on a type of, whatever. It's completely different. But I think what's nice about having the collective is you establish a relationship with these influencers and you don't pay them. The influencers are gifted product. We call it seeding. That's one of the levers that brands use to build relationships, where they get very innovative, limited edition product, and they also get invited to special events and experiences. So for example, at Oakley, we invited a bunch of influencers to Mugello, which is a big race in Italy. And they weren't paid to go, but they were invited to come there, and they were, all expenses paid trip. They got to hang out with all the race stars and the athletes, and, and they were gifted special product. And so in exchange for that, they did a lot of posts about it. So they drive the awareness, and that's kind of how that works. And then you also have that other side of influencer marketing where you're doing paid influencer relationships, and that's a little bit more transactional and very specific. So just depends on the need.
I was just about to ask you about communities and how you speak to them, but I think you answered that with like the example of the race. So how do collaborations connect to consumers between brands and influencers?
Well, I think that the collaboration is really the story, right? So you have a brand, and I'm just going to use Adidas, right? Because because I work in strategy for Oakley, we're working 2-3 years into the future, and I don't want to talk about things that are proprietary. But when I was at Adidas, the collaborator usually comes in to create the story. So there's a shoe, like when you go back to that product proposition, say, for example, it's Superstar. It's a shoe that Adidas has had for 50 years and it's boring. So what are they going to do to jazz it up? Well, they're going to put Pharrell Williams on it, right? And so that's how they jazz it up. That becomes a product collaboration. Then there's a whole story and a campaign around it. The partner typically drives the creative direction and the ideation around that story. So they're the ones communicating it to their community within their tone of voice, so that's an authentic experience for their community. So it's not a matter of, oh, we had some ad agency do the campaign and we're going to give it to him and he's just going to post it. It's really a partnership all through the product development process, and then also throughout the marketing and go-to-market process. The partner's very involved and very vested and engaged in the process. And I think that's why you see certain relationships within that space last for even decades at a time, right? Because ultimately a brand it's very complicated to build these relationships. So when a brand finds a good partner, they want to stick with that partner. And, it becomes a very, not just driving the business, but also driving the brand, and the partner's happy. So when everyone's happy, it's successful. And when it's not happy, they get managed out.
Well, it's also doing it right. I guess, earlier we saw an example of NFL and what not to do. So I guess authenticity is key. And I'm glad you shared that. We're going to shift a little bit.
100%.
Yeah. We're going to shift a little bit and go into DEI and representation, because I think you and I had a great conversation about that. So I read a quote from an interview that you had with some publisher, and I wanted to hear more about this. So the quote says, not only is diversity integral to a healthy company culture, but it's required to win. A team's diversity needs to mirror that of the consumers we serve.
Well, yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think after working for many global brands, I've realized that, multicultural teams outperform homogenous ones, right? And that's not just having people from different cultures, but also having people from different ages, maybe even different gender identities, whatever that might be, whatever that looks like today, you are going to get a much more dynamic, solution-based group with that kind of, makeup within your team, right? So I always try to hire people that aren't like me, because they're going to complement my skill set. They're going to bring something to the table. I think also, that starts internally within a company culture. Right. So that's very, very important. And you have to have a DEI strategy or a representational strategy at a company. Most companies have that now, or they're putting that together. And then also, you want that to sort of mirror the consumer that you're talking to. Right. I mean, a lot of the brands that I've worked with, we're focused on Gen Z, millennials, and now even Gen Alpha we're talking to. So, we're looking for, we're signing younger athletes. We're looking to, I think our oldest athlete at Oakley is 27. We're looking to even bring that down. We're looking to get way more female representation in our sports marketing roster, which is really important. And, just to give you an idea, Nike has 11,000 athletes on contract. So, and I'm not going to tell you, but the sports marketing budget is in the billions. So, when you think about the world stage of the Olympics coming up, track and field, the Olympics in China, there was representation for athletes, because athletes connect with young folks, and brands want to speak through them. So it's just very important that we have also certain sports that need to be much more integrated. And that's something that we're faced with as a challenge.
So before we end our session, there's something personal that I wanted to ask Reggie, because I read some of the LinkedIn recommendations, and I was blown away. Everybody there was referring to her as a mentor. And I want to ask you about your personal commitment to mentorship. I personally think it's wonderful. And I just wanted to see if you can share a little bit more about, what you do.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to mentor. I've always been interested in opening the door for young people into my world, especially coming from working in a male-dominated industry. Obviously, the streetwear industry is extremely male-dominated. The sports industry is male-dominated. So one thing that's been a big thing for me is just including women, bringing women in. There are several women on my team at Oakley. We have the most diverse team at the company, which is really exciting. And it's always been kind of my MO wherever I go. So I think that, and even just folks that I've met through interviews that I wasn't able to hire for whatever reason, I've maintained a relationship with them and, tried to support them and keep in touch with them. And I'm really happy when I see them succeed, and they've all gone on to incredible, they all work at amazing brands now. They're all doing really well. So it's exciting.
Well, I think you make a difference in the lives of the young people that you're mentoring. I want to thank you for your time. I think we're out of time. I was going to have you ask questions, but you can catch up with her, I guess, on the side if you need to.
I'll be out back.